Greetings, Rebel fans. My name is Jason Kelly. This is the Let's Run podcast. I want to welcome you all to the show, and I want to welcome on a very special guest, a person that I have been following for a long time in sports media. If you know me, you know that I'm a supporter of Boise State. I lived in Boise. I love Boise, running on the Greenbelt. I love downtown. That was my life for a year, and I miss it every single day. So I'm honored to have on a Boise State super fan and commentary kind of sports pundit, Mr. Bronco Bleymaier. Is that how you say that? I actually have never seen. Is it Bleymaier?
Nailed
Okay.
it right off the bat, man.
Well,
one of the few.
Yeah, well, it's kind of it's not a name you see very often, but it's a name very related. You see it around Boise quite a bit. So welcome to the show, man. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, this is awesome to be here. This is a little bit of a different experience. I go on a lot of different podcasts from time to time, but I think this is the first time that I've gone on a fellow Mountain West fan podcast. So, well, fellow for right now, but in a couple of years. But we'll talk about that. But this is going to be a
We'll
fun
talk about
conversation,
that.
man. I'm excited to be here. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I really appreciate. I want the Mountain West, for whatever time it has left, as being a conference. If it continues to be a conference in different form or whatever, I like fans from different teams talking to each other, so it's not just like 15-word Twitter brawls all the time. So I really appreciate that. And I was trying to think about who I was going to ask for Boise to come on, and obviously, when we play Boise, I try and go on or talk to, the podcasts of other teams. But I did want to talk specifically to a Boise fan because they've kind of been at the forefront of Group of Five expansion and moving up into a power conference. Boise really should have been up into a power conference about 12, 14 years ago was about the time. But conference realignment strikes when conference realignment strikes. We don't really get to choose that time, as Rebel fans are kind of suffering through at the moment. That 4 years from now, if we maintain this, I think we have a lot stronger of a case. But we're only 2 years into football success, and so you wish you had more of a resume, but you got what you got when you got it. And so I wanted to bring on somebody from Boise, somebody with a lot of experience around Boise. I grew up going to Boise State games here in Vegas. They were always in the Las Vegas Bowl. And so I feel like I have a connection with that school. When I lived in Boise, I had a season ticket thing through the university. So I went to every single home game. Love the blue, obviously. I've never really seen Boise as a rival because we were never really, at least in football, because we never really had a competent football program. But, as we're kind of growing in, a rivalry is I wouldn't say it's actual rivalry. Obviously, that takes years to develop. But, some healthy competition has kind of grown that culminated in us getting smacked in the championship game last year. So how did you start your channel? How has it grown? Like, what's your relationship to kind of content creation around the Mountain West and around Boise State?
Yeah, well, I started my channel 5 seasons ago, so this is my 5th season. So I guess 4 seasons ago, 4 and a bit. But in the middle of COVID, man, everyone's starting to do new things during COVID, right? So I was a little bit of the same kind of a deal. I was in pilot training, and I was sitting in these dorms by myself, away from my family, going through the training, and the season had been canceled, and it got brought back on, and I was so excited about it. But you're isolated and you can't hang out with anybody. And I was like, I need some Boise State, like, get me ready for the season content. Like, I need something like a game preview or a season synopsis, like talk about this weird COVID thing and how it relates to the Boise State and Mountain West. I need something. So I go on YouTube and I'm looking around, and there's nothing. There's Boise editor Bronco Vision. Bronco Vision is what he's on YouTube for the highlights, but there's no commentators. I mean, there's people that will do Boise State videos, but there's no one that's an actual Boise State associated person. BJ Rains hadn't even started his thing yet. There's nobody. And so I'm sitting there, bored, got nothing to do. And I thought, well, I talk on the radio every day when I'm flying. I've never done anything like this. I've written some articles. I've written some blog posts. But like I've never done any kind of verbal video presentations. But like I said, I talk on the radio every day to potentially hundreds of people, depending on what area I'm flying around. So like if I can do that, how hard is this? So I started the first ever video just previewing the Boise State versus, I think it was Utah State, so we opened up versus in 2020. And it just kind of took off, like not right away, but over time it's grown. And I've had an opportunity to bring on my childhood idols and heroes onto the channel, former Boise State players, and been able to talk to them. And it's just, I had Jeremiah Dickey, the athletic director of Boise State, on a few weeks ago, and it's just for me, like I don't see myself as some big YouTube hotshot kind of anything. I just see myself as a passionate Boise State fan that gets an opportunity to talk about Boise State football on a regular basis, and I get joy out of that. So yeah, that's how it started, and I'm having fun doing it. So I'm going to keep on doing it.
Yeah, a couple years ago, I saw a similar lack. Obviously, you guys have Bronco News Nation now that BJ does, and I think he does a really great job with all the guys that come on that show. I listen to it all the time. Just because you want to, yeah, well, just because you want to listen to think, and I think it's good for the ecosystem of like a fan environment if fans have shows that they can kind of be outlets for, and I think it's kind of like an all ships rise. All boats float to the top. The better your media environment is around your school, and that includes opposing schools, I think that makes the viewing experience just better for fans because they have more avenues to kind of fan out. So I started my whole podcast because I wanted to get our basketball coach fired, and nobody was saying it in Las Vegas. Um, and if there's one
Man,
thing that UNLV loves to do, it's fire basketball coaches, because we have 5 Final Fours and a national championship, and there's so many old people that want to go back to that, and it just hasn't happened in the last 20 years. So
yeah.
anyway, so that's kind of the history. So I wanted to talk about conference realignment. What was your and I've listened to you talk to other people about this too, but just for the maybe people that haven't heard your takes, like what was your initial feeling? Did it surprise you? How did you feel initially when you saw that Pete Thamel Yahoo Sports article?
Yeah, and actually, my first take on it was when I saw Ross Dillinger's post out. Actually, when he said that Boise State and San Diego State and UNLV, sorry, not UNLV, sorry, hot topic there. Boise State, San Diego
Yeah,
State,
yeah.
Boise State, San Diego State, and Colorado State were getting added to the Pac-12, and I was about to go to bed. Actually, I had an early morning flight the next day, like very early, like 5 a.m., kind of 4:30 a.m. kind of thing. And so I was going to bed at like 9:50, and I check my phone right before I do, and there's a post from 5 minutes ago where Ross Dillinger is reporting through Yahoo Sports that those four schools are going to be joining the Pac-12, and then my whole night was just screwed. So I didn't get my reaction out to the following day, but I'll say right off the bat, like my first initial reaction was skepticism. Not that it wasn't going to happen, but skepticism that this was the right move because there's a lot of uncertainty out there joining two teams that have had their foot out the door trying to get into every conference that would receive a phone call from them for pretty much since their conference dissolved. And you can't tell me that if the ACC tomorrow said, "Hey, OSU, Washington State, turns out we got a spot for you," that they wouldn't go. And so first off, you're joining a conference that's very unstable. You're joining a conference that's not even a conference yet. It's 6 teams. You got to get to 8. You're joining a conference that you are losing guaranteed revenue. They don't have a firm TV deal. They're going to have something worked out in 2026, but there's nothing guaranteed right now. Their bowl games are, you can't get worse than the Mountain West bowl game. So those will always be a set step up, even if they're the same bowls. But the bowl game structure right now for the Pac-12 is just the current and former teams kept their bowl game alignments. So, Oregon and Washington playing in Big Ten are eligible for Pac-12 bowls if they want to go that route this season. So the conference itself doesn't actually own all the bowl games. And so who knows which ones they'll get to keep when that deal ends in 2025 and they renegotiate the bowl games in 2026. I could see the Big Ten taking a big chunk of those. And then also at the end of the day, you've got all the money you got to spend to get out of this conference. You're spending $17 million to get out of the Mountain West. You're losing your special designator, which I know again is another source topic for a lot of Mountain West fans. But Boise State has that special designator where they get to negotiate their own money separately from the rest of the conference. So right now that equates to 1.8 million more than any other team does in the conference. Now you lose that, and so I had a lot of initial not doubts per se, but the whole Boise State fan base acted like we were joining the Pac-12 from 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Like everybody was just insanely excited because, like you said, it is something that we as a fan base have been waiting for a very long time. 20 years, Kellen Moore days, thinking we deserve an invite and not getting one. And so everybody was acting like, okay, the fulfillment of that dream has happened. And it's not the fulfillment of that dream. It's the fulfillment of a dream, but not that one. And so initially, and if I'd made a video that night, I might have been a little bit more skeptical. I had 24 hours almost, more like 16, to kind of think about it, go through my job, come back, and actually make the video. And I think that I was in a better place after that because I am feeling more confident about this. You do have a lot of benefits that can come out of this. There's talks of a much better TV deal. You look at the competition that is going to be joining Boise State. You are letting loose of some of the lower dregs of the conference. I'm not referring to UNLV here, but there are teams that we can just honestly admit that are pulling the Mountain West down. I know you said the same thing on your own recent reaction.
Five years ago, you would have said UNLV, but now things
Not
are a
now.
little
Not
things
now.
are
No.
not now. No, we're not one of the
Yeah.
dregs of the Mountain West. That's certain. At least we never have been in basketball, but in football
Yeah.
we were for 20 years. So.
But so you have an exciting opportunity here. You're joining the best teams. You look at the three teams at least, not Colorado State, but Boise State, San Diego State, and Fresno State. One of those teams is represented in the Mountain West Conference Championship every single year since its inception. So you are joining the best teams in this conference, again, minus Colorado State. And then Oregon State, Washington State, and then the exciting opportunity to either bring in some bigger brands from the East Coast, or at the very worst case scenario, bring over a couple more teams from the Mountain West. And so in the end, would I say that this is a better move than just Oregon State and Washington State joining the Mountain West? That will depend on who they add from like the AAC. But initially, I don't think it is based on what they have right now. But is it better than getting left behind? And are there a lot of exciting opportunities that come with this? And also just the trust in Jeremiah Dickey. He wouldn't just jump without there being some kind of net that he's going into. So overall, I am excited about this. I do think it's a positive move. I think it's the only move that you could make right now with the other teams that did go. You can't be left behind in the conference like, obviously UNLV fans are feeling right now. So we could be that. We could be looking on the outside again, looking in, and we're not. And so I am positive about it, but I'm not going to be head over heels about it until we see who else this conference adds.
Yeah, and I think that there had been some hope that Florida and Clemson, Florida State and Clemson would kind of blow up the ACC, but with the announcements today, that doesn't seem as likely. Especially, I listened to a big podcast about the grant of rights that exists in the ACC and the legal mechanisms. I'm not a lawyer yet; I'm working on it, but it seems like that contract, that grant of rights, was pretty durable. And also, I don't think that Stanford and ACC is as they're kind of snooty, elitist academic schools. I don't think that they really, like, nothing against Boise State. UNLV could definitely be considered in this too. I mean, UNLV has made a lot of strides in the academic department, but like Fresno State, Boise State, San Diego State's a pretty good academic school. Actually, they're okay. They're top 100. But like, I just don't think that they'd want to be associated because they have a stick so far up their butt that I don't see that happening. So obviously, there's lots of uncertainty. I think that's been the hard part for Rebel fans, is sitting in uncertainty, and we likely will be sitting in uncertainty at least for a couple more weeks. I would assume, and it could be for months. So UNLV fans, obviously, when we read that Colorado State specifically getting in over us, I think that was the sore spot. Everybody respects Fresno State's football acumen. Obviously, everybody thought Boise State was a prime candidate for this. So UNLV fans very disappointed initially. And I, ever since before the Mountain West Championship game, you have been talking about why you don't believe that UNLV is as good of a expansion candidate. And so I want to let you explain to Rebel fans, just in the best way you can. Obviously, some Rebel fans won't like everything you have to say here. I have heard you say it before, so trust me, guys, you're strong enough to hear this. Go ahead and state your case as to why you believe that UNLV wasn't included. Obviously, there are some mechanical things that could also have played a part in this, but I just want to talk about the merits at this point. So I don't want to get into the mechanical issues of it, between whether it be Reno or just kind of litigation issues going on between Gloria Nevarez and the leadership of whatever remains of the Pac-12 leadership at this point. So go ahead and give me that case.
And before I say anything on this, I want to make it very clear that I don't have any kind of vendetta per se against UNLV. I don't, I think we were talking before, I never saw UNLV as a rival per se. And again, fair to say, because their football just hasn't been very good until recently. That was when we met them in the Mountain West Championship game, that was the best team we've ever faced, and Boise State was in a little bit of a different mindset with the new coaching hire and everything. So I don't have any kind of personal vendetta against UNLV. I don't have any hate in my heart towards UNLV. I don't look at them like I do San Diego. I guess San Diego State fans, because they've been a little bit more of a thorn, or Fresno State or Nevada, or TCU or any of these kind of rivals from Boise State's past. I don't have any kind of personal vindication, but when I start seeing conference realignment talks happen, and I see Boise State getting left out again, and I see teams getting raised up in the conversation that I would deem unworthy. Teams that I thought, well, maybe not unworthy, but not compared to what Boise State brings to the table. And I see them being mentioned for reasons that I think are completely bogus as far as being relevant to the new and modern digital age. Then I start to kind of put myself on a little crusade to see if I can change some perspectives here and see if I can get people thinking what I consider the right direction. And so I know that if you've watched my channel, you know I haven't had a lot of respect for UNLV, and I haven't haven't been a big fan of their program. And you could even interpret what I've done as a little bit of a vendetta, but it's not personally motivated; it's facts motivated. And so we'll get into that. And so you look at why UNLV is looked at, why USF is looked at, why San Diego State was said, SMU, like all these teams are thrown out as better candidates than Boise State. And you would think, okay, you know, 3 Fiesta Bowl wins, multiple top 10 appearances, you know, all the Sports Illustrated, you know, articles and with them on the headlines. You'd think Boise State would be that top team in any expansion, and time after time after time, whether it's Big 12 expansion or AAC expansion or whatever, they get left behind and aren't even being considered. And the reason for that is because the decision makers, the archaic decision makers making these decisions, they're looking at the regional TV markets. They're looking at how big is the city that you happen to be in. And I did a video, which I'm sure is kind of what spurred a lot of this on, is teams that you should never be in, teams that should never be in the conference realignment discussion, or teams that you would never want in conference realignment. And so I'm going to kind of hit on some of the points I made in that video in this one. And so back in the day, looking at the regional TV markets, that's which is what all these execs have been raised on. That was valid. There used to be a time, even 15, 20 years ago, where you couldn't just pull up your phone wherever you are and watch whatever football game pretty much whatever football game you want to watch. That was not the case. I mean, especially if you go back into like the 80s, you know, you had to watch it on a television, and there were certain games that were on certain channels and you had to watch those. And if you were a local fan, you could watch your team in that area, and you weren't going to be able to move from California to, you know, to Virginia and continue to watch your team play. Unless they were in a big matchup. And so there was a point when the regional TV markets made sense, when you had a captive audience based on who was there. But in the digital age, it doesn't make any sense. When you have streaming and cable cutting and nobody's actually watching based on, you know, Nelson ratings aren't accurate because nobody's watching through actual cable companies anymore, looking purely at, okay, let's bring Rutgers into the Big Ten because they happen to be in a large TV market. That doesn't make any sense anymore, because the people that live in that TV market aren't watching Rutgers. They're living in that TV market watching Ohio State and Michigan, and they're living in that TV market watching USC and, you know, Oregon, and wherever they've happened to move from, because they have that capability. And the other factor that you have here is the fallacy of the local team. Again, back in the day when you had people moving in and what somewhat of a slower rate, and entertainment options weren't as broad, and so you kind of connected to that local team spirit and you all went to the game together and you had that local community vibe, you would have the capability of a UNLV, as Vegas expands, to be able to bring in fans from those that move in from out of state. However, in the modern age, when you have rapid expansion so quickly that it overwhelms the original populace that's living there. I mean, you look at UNLV, at Vegas. Vegas in the last 20 years has increased by 2 million people. In 20 years, 2 million people. They were sitting at somewhere around a 1 million-ish people 20 years ago, and now they're at just under 3 million people. So the people living in Vegas now, the majority of the people living in Vegas now, they didn't grow up there. They aren't from that area. They came in with their own teams, their own fandoms, and they overwhelmed the original local populace. And so now you have a situation where it happened so quickly that UNLV, playing in a period where they weren't very good and people weren't going to hook on to them, nobody had any incentive in the last 20 years to become a UNLV fan. And now the actual UNLV fans are such a small minority of the town, they don't have the ability to create a strong vibe that is being attached to by these new people coming in, the ones that are there. And so UNLV is in a tough spot. And I think that you look at cities that are expanding so quickly and you go, man, they're expanding so massively, so rapidly. That means that we're going to have all this viewership. And you're not. You can bring UNLV into your conference, but nobody in Vegas is going to be watching UNLV. And again, you have an additional factor here. So that the rapid expansion factor is an issue for any city. But when you add into it a city that has so many entertainment options, it becomes so much harder and so much worse. Look at Tampa. Tampa is a massive entertainment city. They've also got an NFL team there, and it's a vacation city. People are going there to, they got timeshares and they're rotating through and they're going off work and they're going to the beach. They're not going around and going to the local football team. And the same thing, not the beach element, but the same thing happens for UNLV. UNLV is the Vegas Strip. UNLV is, the Raiders. UNLV is the Cirque du Soleil and everything else that UNLV has to offer. And yeah, it's a great city to go and visit and everything like that, but it's not the kind of city that breeds a local team atmosphere and team spirit, especially not now. Now, if UNLV had been a Power 4, Power 5 program, 10 plus wins a year 20 years ago, and they'd had that national recognition, people coming into Vegas had seen that and known about that and attached onto that, you could have a chance. But now in today's market, you're never going to capture that market. And you look at UNLV's attendance ratings and their viewership ratings, and it proves the storyline. UNLV has a stadium that holds 36,800 people. Last year, in the best season in school history, they averaged 23,660. And even this year, this year their home opener 24,512. And you can say, yeah, we're building and we're getting better, but at the same time, like, okay, you did a really good job last year. Like, that should have built some excitement. And this year, the numbers are not that much better average attendance wise than they were the season before. That's 64% stadium capacity. And then you look at viewership. Now, on the surface level, last year's TV viewership was great, 1.46 million, one of the top in Mountain West. However, you have to look at why were people watching those games. Okay, so they had a game versus Michigan, which had 2.97 million views. Those weren't 2.97 million people tuning in to watch UNLV. Those were 2.97 million people tuning in to watch what was a highly ranked, highly talked about, and ended up being the national champion that year. So that's an outlier. That's an aggregate. That is not a reflection of what UNLV draws in on a regular basis. They also had a bowl game versus Kansas, a Kansas team that was an American sweetheart last year, a media darling. That had everybody talking about them. Hey, Kansas, they're a good football team. They're kind of fun to watch now. This is cool. It's also a bowl game, so you're also going to get the boost from bowl game. So they had 2.69 million from the bowl game. That also is not reflective of what UNLV draws in on an average. So, and then on top of that, you had the Mountain West Championship game versus Boise State, which 1.26 million, and that's the Mountain West Championship game, and it's also versus Boise State that is traditionally very good at drawing in viewership. You can't tell me that somebody that tuned into that game out in South Carolina because there was no other football on, they tuned on, was watching it because they wanted to see UNLV. They said, oh, cool, Boise State's on the docket, we'll go watch them, and Boise State's the draw there. So when you take out those three outliers and you look at the average viewership for UNLV, it's 190,000, which is only 6% of the Vegas market in the best year that UNLV had. Boise State, in the worst year in school history, worst year in not worst, 1997.
No, and the first Andy Avalos year was worse too. So it's not even the worst in your last 5 years. So record-wise, I just don't like it when I hear that point, because I'm just like, no, it's not. You won a Mountain West Championship game. It's not the worst year in your school history. You had a worse year 2 years ago.
We had a worse year too. We were headed for the worst year in school history while Andy Avalos was there. And the numbers afterwards. So when I took into account Boise State's numbers, I did the same thing I did with UNLV. I
cut out the Washington game, UCLA,
game, and I took out the UCLA game. So I took out the bowl game, and I also took out the Mountain West Championship game. And then the Air Force game was on CBS Sports, so that wasn't accounted for in the ratings. And I'm not sure who I think FS1 might have played the Utah State game, so that probably was. So you have one game accounted for, but every other game was part of what was on track for, what was being talked about as the worst game record in school history. So I know, yes, after Andy Avalos was fired, 4 games later, we ended up pulling it out and having a better year than the first 7-5 season under him. However, this was the viewership numbers were based off of the worst. And so even in the average worst record in school history, and that's what the fans were feeling, Boise State still had an average TV viewership of it's down here. Average TV viewership of 297,000 plus people. And so again, UNLV, they look attractive at the baseline, but when you have a modern city that is an entertainment city when you have so many other options for people to be able to draw their loyalties to. People are coming into Vegas with their own fan loyalties, and UNLV is not topping those. They could join a Power Four conference tomorrow, and unless they started winning that conference right off the bat, they would still not be able to usurp the fans that came in from, all the California residents that are moving to Nevada right now. They wouldn't be able to usurp the UCLA and the USC and even the Cal and Stanford fans that are coming in. Because you don't just, unless you have a brand, a winning culture, and a brand that is successful and that is nationally relevant and has, unique factors like the blue turf that's exciting and it's a unique draw and people want to come to it and they know about it coming in, you're not going to be able to pull in that TV market. And so again, that's my case against UNLV, and I know UNLV fans probably don't want to hear that, and they're probably already tuning out of the video at this point. But again, this doesn't come with any hate in my heart. I just look at the facts here for UNLV and what they bring, and compared to Boise State. And I will say finally this: I don't think UNLV is a terrible team anymore. I don't. I think that UNLV, they are no longer the bottom barrel of the Mountain West. I think that they've done enough things to push themselves. Now they're the top of the Mountain West, but even in the former conference with all the teams, I think they pushed themselves up to being one of the mid to top level programs, a team that could consistently get to 8 wins and some years challenge for a 10 or 11 win season, kind of taking over where Utah State's position used to be until they kind of fell off the wagon the last few years. And so I think UNLV is building. I think that they're doing well. And I think that there's a future for them outside of the Mountain West, and we can talk about that. But when you're talking about UNLV as a true Power Four, that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about them as a Pac-12 expansion candidate right now. We're talking about the case against UNLV for as a Power Four, like why the Big 12 would want them, or the former Pac-12 or the ACC or something like that. When you talk about them as a true Power Four team, I think Boise State has a case for that. I think Fresno State potentially. I think San Diego State even has a slight case, but UNLV does not have a case for Power Four, even though they have the Vegas market.
Yeah, I think a lot of what you said is fair points. I would quibble with a couple of things. I think from 22, 23, and then this year we don't have enough data yet, but you have seen an 11% increase in TV viewership per year, starting from 21 to 24, and that's per year, which indicates a positive trend. I think, when you have a program that has been as moribund and terrible as UNLV has for however long. Like, it takes time to build a program. You look at the beginning of the Boise State program, and it took great coaches that were dedicated to the school, that worked hard. And again, like I said at the beginning of the conference, like, alignment doesn't strike when you want it, like at the moment you want it to. Boise State in 2011 was ready. They could have joined, the Big Ten and done great things in that era. And I think they could have kept Chris Peterson, and that would have been the dream, I think. But alignment doesn't strike exactly when you want to. So. Do you think that in a vacuum, taking away again the mechanical considerations, do you think that Colorado State should have been invited over UNLV?
So
just comparing those two schools and nothing else.
Yep. I have actually said in previous videos that Colorado State would be a better expansion candidate if a Power Four was looking for a team than UNLV. And it's for a few reasons. And it goes back to the same, some of them are similar reasons why Boise State's a good expansion candidate. Obviously, they don't have the winning culture. Colorado State sucks, and they have sucked for a long time. So obviously, they don't have the winning culture. But the things that they do have, which I think make them attractive to a Power Four, or in this case, the Pac-12, is one, they have the money investment. I know that UNLV is also putting in money in their program, but Colorado State has put in $250 million into their program over the last few years, trying to expand and renovate. I mean, they have a massive donor base of very, very, very dedicated fans. And that's the other factor. Colorado State has a very, very dedicated fan base, which I think is the other factor. You can look at things that make a successful expansion team, but the biggest factor, aside from a winning, successful culture, is a local dedicated fan base. And Colorado State, over the last few years, even though they have sucked and they have been terrible, right? Even despite that, they are still saying, I'm sorry, I'm losing my place here, swapping back and forth between the
you're fine.
But even despite the fact that they haven't been very good and the fact that they haven't played very, very well, they have still kept on track with their stadium sellouts. Their stadiums have been filled about a 67%. So even though they have been terrible over the last few years, their stadiums, they even last year where they had a 5-7 season in 2023. There it is. 5-7 season in 2023, they still sold 65% of their averaged a 65% attendance throughout, even though they've been terrible, and that's pretty consistent. Colorado State's had that dedicated, passionate local fan base, and so I think that's what it takes. I think that's the biggest factor because again, if you have that dedicated local group that no matter what your team does, they are coming out and they are a visible portion of your community, they have the chance that if given the right resources and given the right amount of success, they can actually pull in their market. I know the Denver market is not Vegas is a better market than Denver when you compare the fact that Colorado already has a pretty good lock on the Denver market. So Vegas is a little bit of an open college football market. However, when you look at what the Colorado State fan base is, UNLV fans, they'll show up for basketball, but they're not there for football right now. I mean, they are not there. Colorado State sold about the same amount of tickets as UNLV did last year. UNLV last season for ticket sales, they averaged 23,660 tickets per game. Colorado State sold 26,509. UNLV had their best ever season in recent history. And Colorado State had a 5-7 season. Is coming off their last winning season was in 2017. The last 10-win season was 20 years ago, and they have 1 10-win season in the last 20 years. And Colorado State still, even with all of that, even with everything that's terrible, still sold an average of 26,509 tickets. And so I think when you look at Colorado State, they have the infrastructure. They are putting in the money. Again, $250 million in athletic facility upgrades. That's more than pretty much any other team in the Mountain West. They have the market. Denver, again, not like the best market, but it is a market that they can pull from. You've seen what Colorado has been able to do with, it's Deion Sanders. But
yeah, that's Deion Sanders. It's not.
It's not the same
he
thing.
leaves. He leaves. They're all
leaves.
gone. Like Colorado's not getting viewership anymore.
He,
like they
he
have.
leaves their. I agree. He leaves, they're all gone. But you take a small percentage of that, of the potential of a team that has a passionate fan base. Colorado State's fan base is more passionate than Colorado. They've consistently been a stronger, more regularly attending games than Colorado's fan base. Colorado just doesn't really care. Colorado State wants to be. And so when you look at Colorado State, you look at UNLV, what they've done over the last 20 years is about the same. They really are. Record-wise, it's about the same. But Colorado State actually has the investors that care about their football program, and they have the local fan base that has that dedication and that passion, that given the right tools, give them the right coaches and the right money and the right players, and they get those winning records, they could actually start to pull in that Denver market. Whereas UNLV, they just don't have the core necessary, not yet, and maybe it can come. But right now, they just don't have that core necessary to actually pull in the Vegas market, no matter really how many winning seasons they have.
Okay, so I'd like to make the case for UNLV, and I'll talk here for a few minutes. So I'd like to make the case, and this is to Rebel fans. I'm sure they're going to love this part. So this is why I think that UNLV is a good expansion target. Again, it would take 10 years of winning football and 50,000 per game attendance to arrive to the level of something like a Big 12. That kind of talk was just because people saw Vegas and said, oh, UNLV. But they didn't actually I don't think that talk was ever taken seriously. And I'm actually pretty upset with our athletic director because I think part of the reason why he wasn't in the initial, because he wasn't proactive enough. He wasn't saying, all right, here's what we'll do. I think he was slow-footed. That's my opinion. And I think that the reason why is because he has Big 12 relationships and he's like having some stupid hope when it's like, come on, dude, we're not there. It's not going to happen. Shut up. The Big 12 doesn't need UNLV to use Las Vegas. I do think the Pac-12 does, but the Big 12 does not need UNLV to use Las Vegas optimally. So when you're looking for a good expansion target, you want winning culture in money-making sports, obviously the larger emphasis being on football. You want, and this is in descending order and level of importance. You want investment by the school into money-making sports, again, football. You want fan support. This is third. Brand, then TV viewership, then you look at a market share analysis, a market penetration analysis. These all kind of go together, but I think they're separate points. Overall market analysis, Then comes Title IX considerations, which we talked a little bit about beforehand, travel considerations, non-money making sports success. So now we're getting to the very low. And then the very bottom, I have academics because I think it's important to mention. But you see where my priorities are. The very bottom of the list. So I don't know, like if you're familiar with how bad UNLV, like the reasons why UNLV football was as bad as it was. But did you ever go to Sam Boyd Stadium? Have you ever been to a game out there? The old stadium we used to play in?
Never been to a UNLV game, no.
So our old stadium was built in the late 60s, early 70s, and it was an hour from campus. It sat on an empty desert lot, and it was, even at the time it was built, the worst stadium in college football. It was the old Silver Bowl. The casinos, Sands, MGM International, when they kind of moved in the 80s, they had some early success with the football program. But when they moved up to FBS in the late 70s, the casinos made a concerted effort to distance themselves from college athletics. UNLV football was literally purposefully ignored in this town by the people who make money in this town. Now, and UNLV basketball was not ignored, but if you know about the early 90s, the NCAA basically passed a death sentence on all of our athletics after the Jerry Tarkanian thing because we were cheating our asses off. I apologize, Mom. I shouldn't cuss, but we were. And so UNLV football was in such a bad position, and that was purposeful, through structure and through just plain out neglect. In 2015, 2016, the Fertittas, so that's the family that owns the Houston Rockets and also has a deep connection with the Houston Cougars. They wanted to hire their guy, Tony Sanchez. I don't know if you, but Tony Sanchez was the Bishop Gorman coach here in town. And Tony Sanchez and the Fertittas basically made a pitch to the university saying, hey, football's worth investing in. And we got a lot of monetary investment. So point number 2, UNLV has now the Fertitta football complex, which I believe is, I don't know about whatever Colorado State is planning, but I believe the Fertitta football complex is the most expensive and nicest, is what I would consider it, in the Mountain West. There's no team that has a better practice football facility than UNLV. That opened in 2020. That's my opinion, but at least in terms of cost and monetary value, it is the highest. That's a new investment. Part of the other thing was because the Raiders were coming in, the UNLV spent a lot of money and worked with Clark County and Allegiant Stadium to get a new football stadium that is like a mile and a half from our campus, and also maybe a top 5 college football stadium in the country, just in terms of mere facilities. UNLV does have its own area in the stadium. A lot of people say we rent the stadium, but no, the funding, the public funding for the stadium was actually contingent on UNLV being able to call it just as home as the Raiders do. So huge upgrade. We went from the worst stadium in college football to one of the better. I wouldn't say it's one of the best because obviously I think that the histories that exist at some of the Big Ten and the SEC stadiums add a little bit more uniqueness, and but it is certainly among the best and probably the best in Group of 5, just in terms of technology and even accessibility. It's very accessible. It's like a half a mile from the airport. You have a annual, at least I think it's up to $2 million, but an annual investment by the Raiders. You have the Boyd Sports Complex, which is a $7 million complex opening for all the lower level sports, and a $75 million renovation into the Thomas and Mack, all done within the last 6 years. I think that pretty clearly shows, not to mention with the Fertittas and the Adelsons, if you know the big money donors in town, I think that pretty clearly shows that there is a legitimate big money investment from the town into UNLV football. We hired the wrong guy in Marcus Arroyo. You saw a team that was willing to let go of a coach, even though he'd only had really 2 seasons, because I don't really count the COVID season as real football. And a hiring of Barry Odom, making him, I believe he's the 2nd highest paid, but I don't know, with Neil retiring in Wyoming, he might be the highest paid coach in the Mountain West at this current time. I think he was higher. I know he was higher than Andy Avalos, and he got a raise too. So I think there's clear monetary investment from the city of Las Vegas into football. And I don't think that gets talked about enough in terms of alignment. Like, we talk about the practice facility, when you talk about the new stadium, when you talk about all the investment that's coming in, I think that's kind of an underappreciated time. And that takes time to manifest in success. Again, this is only our second season of being a real football program. I guess you could say our fourth season if you want to count the first 2 Marcus Arroyo years. And so that takes time to manifest itself, but the investment is there. Fan support, if you look at like annual athletic budgets, the only 2 institutions in the Mountain West with higher athletic budgets are Air Force, which I don't know exactly what's going on there. I think there's other considerations in terms of how they play their sports, but they do. And San Diego State from last year, this is the 2023, UNLV had 66. San Diego State was at 95, which I thought was a wild year for athletics. I have no idea why. And UNLV was in 3rd, and Air Force had 68. So Boise State 58, Colorado State 62. I think there's a pretty big argument that UNLV is clearly investing into athletics. And it takes time to show that. Again, I wish that we had 3 or 4 more years of good success in a row, but we don't. For fan support, again, you're seeing an annual increase in attendance year by year. It takes time to build trust. Fans had 20, 40 years of failure. And so I'd love to just say that, I think that this year is kind of a big year, kind of a, crap on the pot or get off kind of year for UNLV fans. This game against Fresno State, I'm hoping we can get up to 35,000. That's kind of the school's goal, and I'm trying to promote that as well. Because I think that we want to show that we are actually capable of doing that. So this is kind of that's kind of fan support. In terms of brand, UNLV basketball is still technically a national brand. It's been a long time, don't get me wrong, but if you listen to guys like Bill Simmons, Colin Cowherd, the big, Doug Gottlieb, kind of the big national guys, they all grew up in the 90s, and UNLV was, Duke in the 90s. It's like, it's not, they weren't, they were as high as you can possibly get in a national sport in the 90s. So there is some brand value in terms of basketball. Obviously, there's none with football, but I just thought I'd mention that. TV viewership, I know I saw a stat that UNLV has the lowest TV viewership since 2016. I think it's a little unfair considering in 2020 we had our 2 nationally televised games canceled due to COVID restrictions, and those were kind of the zeros. So again, you are seeing an annual increase if you start in 2022 of anywhere between 10 and 15% in terms of national TV viewership. And so I think positive trends indicate a brighter future in terms of TV viewership. Market share analysis, this is the hardest part for UNLV, is that if you go back to 10 years ago with basketball, we were top 25 in the country in attendance with basketball up until about 2015. And then what happened in 2016, the Golden Knights came to town and UNLV basketball fell off a cliff. And so the biggest disadvantage that UNLV has is that we're in a market where if you're not winning, people are not going to come. They're not going to come at all. You're going to get 0 attendance if you're not winning. There's too many good entertainment options. Not only do you have the Knights and the Raiders and an NBA team, which will most assuredly be in Vegas in the next couple of years. That's the biggest thing on UNLV, is that the floor is pretty low. But I think that there is a legitimate argument that because of investment and upward trajectory, the ceiling is very high. How high is it? We don't really know until you get 10 years of sustained success. But I think the ceiling is pretty high. And I think even if you look at Boise State's television draw, I went back to 2012, 2011, 2013. And some of those numbers were kind of hard to come by, actually, because I don't think that Nielsen had done a very good job. But what I saw was very similar kind of number. They were big back then, and they're big still. And so, Boise State has a very low floor. You have a town that is dedicated to that school, that loves that athletic department, that loves the blue. And Boise State's floor is incredibly high because of that. They're never going to same thing with BYU. BYU is never, because of the Mormon Church, ever going to not be a valuable brand. But I think that floor, that ceiling is kind of capped. And I think that UNLV does legitimately have a good chance for a high ceiling. And then lastly, I'll go through these pretty fast. Title IX considerations, this kind of goes with the non-money making sports. But when you're building a conference, you legally, even though these things aren't important monetarily, you do legally have to have certain sports, and those sports have to be facilitated, not because they make money or because you want them, but just because you legally have to. Vegas is incredibly valuable in that sense because, one, the campus is less than a mile from the airport. It's a central location that you can get to from anywhere for pretty cheap. And therefore, you've seen Mountain West championships held in Las Vegas, whether they be for softball, for cross country, for golf, for swimming. A lot of these other sports have been able to use Las Vegas as a hub, just like basketball has. Um, and so I think that adds a certain number of value because it makes those sports like baseball easier to uphold and easier to keep going and cheaper. I don't think that this new pack, everybody talks about the war chest that Oregon State and Washington State have, but that's not going to last very long. I mean, like at some point you have to make cost effective measures. And that's why I think Memphis and Tulane are actually a lot harder of a sell than people think they are. And that's simply because their athletic budgets do not want to be drained by sending their women's rowing team across the country to compete, and that's tough. And that's something we're football minded people, and that's correct because that's what drives the money. But those other sports are not options. They have to exist. And you have to make those sports easy to exist. And so Las Vegas as a central location really facilitates that pretty easily. And so academics were kind of the last thing. UNLV does have designation as a tier 1 research facility, which is important, I guess, for whatever reason. Could I tell you what that means? Absolutely not. But apparently that designation is important. It has a law school and a medical school, and enrollment is growing. It grows about 3 to 5% per year. So as a university, it's getting up to, you're going to see at the 35,000 student mark next year. Hopefully, it's kind of the goal. So as a university, it's growing as well. And so I think that those are kind of my big points. Obviously I'm selling potential, but you're not just seeing potential, you are seeing growth. It's not completely vague. There's growth there. There's serious investment there. There's money from people, MGM and Caesars have both made annual commitments to UNLV athletics. And those companies have they have FU money. I mean, they have so much money. And so the potential isn't just potential. It is being realized, but it takes time. And so I don't know how you feel about that. And so I believe that UNLV should have been among the 4. I think, honestly, I think UNLV will be, eventually there. I think that they should have been among the 4, taking out of consideration those technical arguments. But do you have any thoughts about anything I said there?
Well, I do actually have some. I think that first off the bat, I think your order is absolutely spot on. I think that, that's the right way to think about it. I had something written down similarly when I did my preview. You talk about, having the wins, obviously, and then the brand, and then the watchability and the the market share and everything else like that. And I didn't break it down necessarily quite as technical as that. I did enjoy that discussion that you just gave right there. But I think your order is right, and especially having academics last. I think that is a key part of what has caused a lot of conferences to fall apart, and what is causing some other conferences to look at potentially falling apart. Pac-12, one of the biggest reasons that they collapsed was because they just could not get out of their ivory towers and look at what actually was important, which was the football. They had professors making decisions on how much money they should make TV program wise, and that shows you where their perspective was. And the ACC is guilty of a lot of the same things, and that's a big reason that Clemson, Florida State, trying to get out, and maybe they'll stick around now for a little bit more with the deal that came out today. But I mean, ACC is similar, and that's why they find themselves as the 4th best conference in the Power 4 right now, at least arguably so. And so
that's right. I agree.
Yeah, I think that I think the points you make are good as far as alignment. And I will say that I was not aware of the exact numbers there funding wise for UNLV. And you do make some good points with the Raiders being there and investing back into it, and then obviously the casinos investing back into it. Something I am going to say though, especially when you talk about the fan support, and you're right. Over time, you have that winning success, you build that program, you can get up to having a passionate fan base. But if anything, like you said, that Vegas teaches us is that in Vegas you got to be a winner, right? And so if you're not winning and you're putting all that money in and you're not having the results, and you have a couple of down seasons, now you're back at ground zero, like almost immediately. You have to maintain that success. And so I think that could be a case for Colorado State over UNLV, is that their fans, through the scientific study that has been done the last 20 years of sucking, have proved that they'll stick around. If there's anything they've learned from this case study over the last 20 years, is that their fans, even when they suck, are going to continue to come out and support that program. And then you look at that and go, well, what could they do when they're winning? And then you start to see some of that potential. And obviously, same goes with Boise State. Obviously, they have had the winning success, but even when they have a down year, like the last 3 years, their stadium attendance has increased. They've sold more season tickets over the last 3 years, while their program has been declining than they did while in previous years while they were doing better under Harsin. And so I think those arguments have to be made. And so when you look at UNLV as an expansion candidate, you have to look at what are you investing into, because it is a gamble going after a school. And yeah, Vegas is a perfect place to go gambling. But it is a gamble going after a school that hasn't put up those winning seasons previously. And yeah, they had a 9-win season, but it wasn't like Tulane numbers. Like Tulane is like another one of those schools that you could look at, and they've had about the same record as UNLV, pretty much a non-factor in the football world over the last 20 or so years. And yeah, they have 2 good years. They have a 12-win season and 11-win season, and I think they played okay this season. I think they can get to 9 or 10 wins. But it's different. It's different when you go 12 wins and go to a New Year's Six. It's different. The UNLV's recent success is one 9-win season and one 3-0. Great start of the season, by the way. I'm very impressed by what they've done. I would say 2 good Power Four wins, because the Power Four teams aren't good, but 2 Power Four wins is good. And 3-0 is great, and I think that they have a potential to build on that this year. But again, it's not like they have just. When you talk about Tulane versus UNLV as far as expansion candidates go, and you look what Tulane has done, even though it's again a recent spectrum, a recent collection of results, just like UNLV's is, Tulane's is on a different level of success.
Yeah, they went to a New Year's Six bowl. They beat USC, the Caleb Williams USC team.
Yeah.
That's
Caleb
everybody
Williams,
watched that game.
Which we're finding out, beating Caleb Williams is not necessarily as impressive as we thought, but
No, but I mean, he'll be okay. He'll be okay.
Well,
he just needs
we'll
to cut the crap out.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like I would just say one other thing is that, like, getting UNLV, I've heard the argument that you do not need UNLV to get the Las Vegas market. You can still use the Las Vegas market. But I would say just to that, like, because the Big 12 kind of does that. The Big 12 holds their media days in Las Vegas. And I think that they're a big enough conference and they have big enough brands that probably is true. But what UNLV does give you is, one, guaranteed trips to Allegiant Stadium for all the teams. 2, it gives you the Thomas and Mack Center. Again, that's like half a mile from the airport. And that is a perfect place. Like, if you were like, oh, we don't need UNLV for Las Vegas, where are you going to hold your basketball tournament? Because you're not going to hold it at the Thomas and Mack. You're not going to hold it at T-Mobile. You're not going to hold it at MGM. The Thomas and Mack is the best place to hold it. And that's a valuable asset for a league because it's so central, because it's so easy to get to. So, I mean, what you're saying in terms of, it's kind of a dangerous game in Vegas. You play a high risk, high reward kind of system. If you suck, people won't come. But I do think that you put enough money into something, your results are going to be okay over the long term. You may have short-term fumbles. You may have a down year or two. But if UNLV does get into this Pac-12, which again I think they will, I think that UNLV, Memphis, and Tulane are the big targets. The Memphis and Tulane thing is kind of a little blurry, even though it seems likely. That's just because of travel. I tell you, man, these universities of presence do not like their volleyball teams having to travel cross country 35 times a year. Now, Stanford can do it because they have a $2 billion endowment. But Memphis is not, Tulane specifically is not a school that's drowning in athletic money in the way that a school like, that Stanford is. So I think the potential is worth it. I really do. And I totally get your point. It's true that, if UNLV sucks, that's not great. But the worst comes to worst, your fans get to go to Allegiant Stadium and get trips to Vegas, and you have a great place to hold your basketball tournament, and you have a centralized location for all your other sports. I just think it's a no-brainer, and I think that it's mechanical issues that are holding it up, and that it's not actually UNLV as an expansion target. But that's my opinion on it. But you do make good points.
I mean, I will say, I don't think UNLV is without value. And I think as far as a Pac-12 team goes, this Pac-12 and not being
this new version
of Pac-12, I think that UNLV could come in and be successful, because it's one of the points I made for why UNLV is not a good expansion candidate for a true Power 4 is, okay, let's say that the Big 12 picks up UNLV tomorrow. It's going to take a while to build up and get success. And even then, you're playing tough teams every single week. You don't have that winning culture. How long does a coach want to stick around when he is getting battered every single week and he can go elsewhere? And now you got to, UNLV's success right now is because they have a good coach. What happens? Heck, can you get the same level? And so most group of five teams, when they join a Power Four, spend a few years and sometimes a lot longer than that as a bottom feeder, barely eking out 7 wins in the conference. We're seeing that with a lot of the new additions to the Big 12 this year from the American Athletic Conference.
Yeah.
However, joining the Pac-12, that's not necessarily the case. UNLV is being successful right now against Mountain West teams. They're playing mostly Mountain West teams. Now you're not getting the easy, wins against New Mexico and Hawaii and all those kind of other things. You do have to play the top level, but UNLV has proven that they can, at least hold their own right now. Most cases. Again, I know that Mountain West championship game was lopsided, but I think you also saw a Boise State team that was just in a different place. I mean, there was just so much more to play for. The team felt like they were playing to get Spencer Danielson the job, in that it had already been decided before that game. But they felt like they were. There's all this energy, and they were like, "We're going to come
Positive
in and
momentum. Yeah.
yeah." UNLV just was unfortunate that they had to. I mean, I think they would have done
we
this
were we
anyway.
were we were absolutely destroyed by, like, our team was a paper tiger by that point. Our quarterback had kind of fallen apart mentally. So I said that before the game. I was like, I don't see us winning this game. I just think that our team's kind of fallen apart by this point. And the only reason we were in the championship game, because we'd really fallen apart. I think San Jose had a very legitimate argument to get the championship spot over us, just in terms of recent performance. But the only reason we were in was because of outdated computer rankings, apparently. So the
Right.
computer ranking scandal of last year was hilarious. But I think you make great points. Is there anything else you wanted to say on that? Because I just wanted to ask about your impressions about Mountain West football generally. But was there anything else you wanted to add on expansion talk?
Yeah, I did. One last point on here, and I was, like you, surprised that Colorado State was the team that was added to the conference. I was surprised by that, and I know that some of it has been talked about as, was it the anchor Nevada? I know that today the Nevada School Board said that they were surprised to find out that Nevada and UNLV were required to be in the same conference together. So, like, maybe that's not the reason that they were left out.
So
Um,
that was a member of the school board, and there have been conflicting reports. There have been members that have said they
okay,
do have to be tied to the hip. There have been members that have said they don't have to be tied to the hip.
okay,
Ultimately, they do not have to be tied to the hip, but it still has to come down to a vote. I think that part of the reason why UNLV wasn't invited is because there would have had to have been a public vote to get UNLV out of the Mountain West Conference. And the Pac-12 was really scummy with this, with the Mountain West, because the Mountain West, through Washington State and Oregon State, a life preserver, said,
they
"Hey,
did.
we'll save you for a couple of years." And what the Pac-12 did was, in the cover of night, uh, because Spencer Danielson said he had no idea this was coming, and I've seen a lot of reactions by other head coaches. What they wanted to do was take away the Mountain West's ability to fight back, and by taking away San Diego State and Boise State specifically, they took away the Mountain West's will to fight. And so that I think it's kind of scummy, But again, like, it's a dog eat dog world. Like, you gotta make the move you gotta make. So I mean, like, but at the end of the day, like, I do think Oregon State's athletic director is a little scummy for how they treated Gloria Nevarez in the Mountain West Conference here, because it was something that was done instantly. And to add UNLV in the initial round, they would have had to have made a public vote, and I don't think that would have worked out narrative wise. But anyway, you were continuing a point. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I like the Oregon State angle on this. I think we can fully blame this on them. I think that yeah,
Yeah.
I think the Oregon State fans collectively decided to do this, and so, or Boise State fans, get on the hate wagon here, because Oregon, yeah, that's our new threat. We got to take them down every year. Um,
Yeah.
but I
I'm
do I
glad you
do
guys
agree.
have that rivalry. I'm glad you guys have that rivalry now. It's great. I
It's
love it.
emerging, but it's emerging.
Yeah.
But I'm not a huge fan of the Oregon State fans, most of them.
Most
However,
of them. Yeah.
I will say I was shocked. I was shocked that Colorado State was included and not UNLV. I had said that, just broad scheme of things, Colorado State my main point in that necessarily wasn't that Colorado State makes the better expansion candidate, but that you could look at them as almost equal. And my point was that UNLV should not be a Power Four expansion candidate. That was my main point on that. But I did expect UNLV, at least for the Pac-12, to be included. However, and if they had been in the first place, I think it would be a completely different discussion right now. But now that they
Mm-hmm.
weren't included, someone made a very good point on this the other day. I think it was Master Football, Jake Posey, Master Football, and he said that, when you go back for UNLV right now, if you choose to do that, you have to pay more for them than you did for any other of the Mountain West schools you took in the first place. You have to pay more for UNLV than you did for Boise State because of the poaching penalties.
Mm-hmm.
The poaching penalties increase quite exponentially for every team that you go in and take. And so if you go after UNLV, it is going to be the most costly decision available for conference realignment. And so I don't know if we're talking about future Pac 12 realignment teams here, but I'll throw out a couple of names that I'm looking at. UNLV, just if there's no money attached to them, makes perfect sense. They do make perfect sense. They have the facilities that you're talking about. Right? There is benefit to being able to play those championship games in Vegas because while people might not be coming to watch UNLV on a regular basis in Vegas, they'll go and watch a championship game. That's a good entertainment opportunity there. You're going to get the travel opportunities and everything like that. And so there is the benefit.
Mm-hmm.
However, again, the costs to what UNLV brings to the table right now, I don't know. I mean, you look at teams that could be coming over, like maybe Memphis or Tulane or even North Texas, and you don't have to go out and pay that amount of money, and their buyout numbers are much less. That's like 10 million or less dollars to go out and get those teams. Those I think make a little bit better sense. You also then get the opportunity to dig into East Coast market, a chance to fight against the East Coast bias as well. I think that UNLV will not be in the Mountain West in the next 2 years. I think they'll either be in the Pac-12 or the American Athletic Conference. But if I had to pick right now which one I think they're going to end up in, assuming that the American Athletic Conference teams have the same interest levels that is being reported, my guess would be that in this next round of whoever gets added, UNLV's probably not there just because of unless the Mountain West dissolves. That's a hefty cost to overcome just for UNLV.
Well, I do think that it would be worth, obviously I do. I do think that ultimately, like long term, it's definitely worth, having Vegas as a home base for a conference it's something that has greatly benefited the Mountain West. And I think that ultimately, it's not just what does UNLV bring, but what does the central location, what does the ease of access? Part of the problem for Boise, I lived there. The airport's not very big. Like the options flying in and out of the airport are very difficult to get to. You have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of flights coming from everywhere in the world, instantly available at a cheap price for Vegas. I think the value's there, and also I think travel costs for lower level schools that really adds up. I'm not so sold that Memphis and Tulane are as in as the Tulane fans at least seem to think. And it's just because of travel. It's just because I don't think that those schools are big enough, and I don't think they have big enough endowments to justify the travel. What do you think about that? Do you think that Memphis is okay adding? Because even Memphis and Tulane aren't even that close to each other. It's not like even those schools. It's not like having UTSA and UT Austin. It's where they're relatively close to each other. Like, what do you think about the travel aspect of it?
The travel aspect, first off, I think when you talk about the travel aspect, you don't need to assume it's the entire athletic department traveling, because a lot of teams do that. A lot of teams, when like Liberty came up from the FCS, came from independent over to Conference USA, they didn't bring when they came up from the FCS to independent, not every single team moved up into independence with them. It was their football program, and their basketball was still playing normally there in their previous FCS conference. Oregon and Washington and USC and UCLA, a lot of their other sports that they carry, like because of the Title IX restrictions, aren't playing in the Big Ten. A lot of those are playing in other different conferences that they put. Even Boise doesn't have every single team in the Mountain West because the Mountain West doesn't support them. Their volleyball program and a couple of their wrestling program are participating in other conferences, and so I don't think you have to say Memphis and Tulane and even UTSA, if you add them, they're bringing their entire athletic department into this new Pac-12. I think football, obviously, that's the moneymaker. And I think basketball. I think those are the two that you're looking at. I think this new conference is pretty strong in basketball. I mean, you got San Diego State, who's been good. Colorado State has been pretty good in basketball the last couple of years. Boise State, obviously, I mean, that came out of nowhere for Boise State fans. But, under Leon Rice, the last 10 plus years, our basketball program has been very good. And then I'm actually not entirely versed on what Oregon State brings to the table, but I know Washington State's basketball is pretty good. So, I mean, they have the money,
they're
and stuff. So
they would be middle to lower. They would not have been among the top of neither Oregon State nor Washington State would have been as very competitive in the Mountain West last year. And over the last 5 years, I think only Washington State has a tournament appearance between these programs over the last 5 years, but I could be wrong about that. I don't, but I know Oregon State has.
Right. So I think that you're a competitive, maybe not as competitive as the Mountain West was basketball wise, but I think you're a competitive basketball conference and the football. And so those
Yeah.
two come over, and then you bring what sports you can, and then you find homes for the rest. And there's always conferences that need the level of competition. So I don't think the travel cost element, especially when you consider what happens if those teams don't join. Memphis and Tulane are looking at the American Athletic Conference and this new Pac-12 and going, what's our path to the playoffs if this conference gets put together? Are we going to get? I mean, it's the same reason that Boise State jumped to the Pac-12. It's that feeling of getting left behind. It only takes one team. If Memphis leaves, if Tulane leaves, even if maybe North Texas leave. I mean, it only takes like one team out of the American Athletic Conference to move to shift the rest. And so
Yeah.
of those three, I don't think you could say that none of them have interest. I think that it will just depend on if they decide that the potential TV deal is worth it and exposure.
That's the big thing. What do you think about so I don't see so if you watch the old Pac-12 try and negotiate its TV deal, do you ever watch the Monty show? You know what that
No,
is?
no.
Okay. So he is in my view the best person for conference realignment, but the old Pac-12, and this is going longer than I expected it to.
Yeah.
You were right. The old Pac-12 was really struggling, and we're talking about Oregon, Washington, was really struggling to get above 25 million a year annually. And what I worry about is a 10 to 12 million dollars kind of seems like what the new Pac-12 is looking at. And when the AAC is already offering 10 million, if the AAC can strengthen itself with Air Force, which is something that I think is going to happen, I think having the service academies together just makes too much sense. Especially if Mountain West is careening off a cliff like it looks like it is. Um, do you think that revenue is worth switching conferences, especially when I think the ACC and I think the Big Ten and I think the Big 12, I think all of those not the Big Ten, but the Big 12 and the ACC, I do think would have interest in a school like Houston in 3 or 4 years, especially with the amount of investment that FedEx is putting into Houston's athletic program. Do you think that the grant of rights in the new Pac-12 will be high enough to justify that?
All right, real quick before you continue, is my mic still okay? I had to switch over.
Yeah, looks good. You're good.
My phone, like I said, we're going longer, which I love. I love the discussion.
Sorry, yeah, I'll try and get us out of here as fast as I can. Yeah.
Yeah. No, we're good. We can keep going, man. Just real quick to clarify on that, mentioning the Houston market. You saying which team are you referencing within the Houston market? Because Houston obviously is with the Big 12 right now.
Did I say Houston? I meant I meant to say Memphis. I apologize.
Okay. All right, cool.
Yeah, I'm talking about Memphis and Tulane.
Okay.
And just if the grant of rights the grant of rights in the media market will be high enough in the Pac-12 to justify incurring those costs, and also jumping into a conference with no media rights deal in place is absolutely insane. Like it's fun not to be the team that's left behind. It is. It's fun to be in the new thing. And I'm not saying that I wouldn't rather trade places with Colorado State in a heartbeat, but it's got to be terrifying because you don't know what type of offer you're going to get. And if the old Pac-12 was having struggles getting over 25 million, do Washington State and Oregon State get as many viewership as they did because they're Washington and Oregon State, or do they get it because they were in the same conference as Oregon and USC and UCLA for so long? I don't know. I don't know long term that people are going to value Corvallis as much as they did when Corvallis was linked with Eugene.
I mean, those are good points definitely made there. I think a lot of this has to do with what do the TV partners want? A lot of this last round of conference expansion, especially the Big Ten, was driven by the TV partners wanting specific things out of not having to pay for the chaff. They wanted the big teams, the big brands, have them all in one conference. That's really what's driven conference realignment right now. And I think it still applies to the Pac-12 and to this group of five conference realignment, because there is still money to be made in the group of five. There's a lot of money to be made in the group of five. And so that conversation still continues. When you look at what the Pac-12 is getting, Pac-12 is getting American Athletic Conference is getting $7 million per team right now. And then the Mountain West is getting $5 million per team. And then Boise State gets, again, that $1.8 million additional. So those numbers can definitely be topped. The TV deal gets renegotiated in 2026. It was going to be the same for the Mountain West now, and we'll see that number is going to be much lower. But when you look at what
the TV markets were, what the TV partners, in this case CBS and Fox, what they were paying for in the Mountain West, they're paying for the teams that are now in the Pac-12. They weren't paying for the conference because they had, Utah State in it. They weren't paying for the conference because it had Hawaii. They were paying for the conference because it had Boise State, why we had additional money attached to us. They were paying for Fresno State and San Diego State, maybe not Colorado State. I think they were paying more for UNLV than they were for Colorado State. But the three big ones there, those are the big reasons. So the market worth of the Mountain West was those three teams, and then those three teams had to split it with the rest of the conference because that's how our conference works. So now you look at, okay, we've moved into the Pac-12. If we add the right brands, again, who are they paying for in the American Athletic Conference? They're paying in the American Athletic Conference. They're paying for Memphis. They weren't necessarily paying for Tulane when they wrote the deal, but they're paying for Tulane now with the viewership that's increased with them because of their success. They're paying for North Texas, UTSA. They're paying for UTSA. So those are the big teams that they're paying for. I know they also have the Army and Navy games.
Well, the service academies have huge fan bases, and they get like Air Force actually does pretty well with viewership. I would say the service academy is more so than Tulane. Maybe not as much as Memphis, but like the service academies drive the AAC in my view.
I'd say yes, they are paying for the service academies. But again, when you talk about national perspective and why that conference is relevant, maybe you do get the boost in TV viewership from the service academies. But the reason that people are tuning in to watch their games, yes, Army and Navy would get views anywhere, but they get more viewers playing against those teams. And do Army and Navy get the same amount of viewership if they're just playing does Air Force get the same amount of viewership if they're just playing in this new Mountain West? I think the viewership goes down quite a bit. They still maintain, but it goes down. So there is value in the service.
Well, and the service academies it goes up when they play each other too. Like those are the games that get the most viewership. And so that's why Air Force is the AAC. That's why when you talk about UNLV exit fees, this is all negotiating, man. I mean, the Pac-12 is trying to literally destroy the Mountain West, and I think they're going to do it. I think they're going to pull it off. Like, I don't think even the exit fees that Boise State, Colorado State, like, I don't know that they're going to have to pay as much as has been reported because of this ruthless negotiating from the Pac-12 with the Mountain West. So anyway, I interrupted you. Sorry.
No, that's all right. But I think, again, yes, those paying for these service academies and paying for their viewership, that's going to continue. But if you can take out the valuable brands, the valuable brands that they're paying for primarily as far as national relevance goes, and that would again be the Memphis, Tulane, maybe even UTSA, and put them in the Mountain West, then you take the top brands from the Mountain West that they were paying for, and you put those into one conference together, then obviously add in what Oregon State, Washington State are able to potentially draw as well. I think you've got a very lucrative potential contract here. I think that it's definitely going to be more than what either conference is making already. It's definitely going to beat $5 million, and I think it can beat $7 million.
Yeah.
I think you're definitely looking, especially when you now have a smaller conference that you're having to spread that money out amongst each other. You're looking at a conference between 9 to 10 members. I think you're probably looking at somewhere between 10 and 15 million per team, and that's not Power 4 money per se, but it's a big step in the right direction. I mean, twice what Mount West was making before, and it's depending on which end of the 10 to 15, it's potentially twice what the AAC teams are making as well. And so now that's deferring travel costs. And then you have the fact that almost guaranteed you are sending your champion to the college football playoffs. I mean, the American Athletic Conference last year got a huge indictment that I'm sure stirred the waters amongst these teams that are now potentially looking at the Pac-12 and saying maybe we need to get out of this. Is when Liberty went to the New Year's Six over SMU, and it wasn't just because Liberty had an undefeated record. What they said against SMU being a candidate for that was that the strength of schedule between Liberty and American Athletic Conference, when you just consider the wins, was not that significantly wide. The Conference USA is garbage. They are the worst conference in the country, especially now with the MAC actually doing some good stuff. They are the refuse of what is left of conference realignment added with some FCS teams. They are terrible. And the American Athletic Conference, now that they have lost their top programs to the Big 12, was compared favorably by the CFP committee to Conference USA. That is that's depressing. I mean, that's go home,
Yeah.
crack of Hennessy depressing. That is bad. And so I think that you're at a point right now where that CFP money is going to be huge. The money and the notoriety and the attention that comes to that, not just for the individual program, but for the team involved. And I think that you can definitely negotiate a much higher rate. I mean, the group of 5 schools are getting like $3 million right now. I'm not saying that the Pac-12 is going to get an auto amount, but they're going to, I think, increase the amount of money that they're getting from that CFP. Put it above 5 million, 10 million, somewhere in that range of what they can get based on their market shares that they're drawing in. So I think overall financially, the move justifies the potential drawbacks if you can get the right TV deal. And there are a lot of partners out there. I mean, I think CBS and Fox would up what they're paying if they could bring in some other teams from ESPN. If they could steal some teams from ESPN, I think they would up what they're paying for the Pac-12. What they were previously paying the Mountain West, because they would just shift. Mountain West would get a terrible TV deal, and they would just shift that money over to Pac-12 and then add some more for the value. So I think ESPN could be interested to kind of increase their stranglehold on college football here. This is what ESPN's been wanting. This is the best of the rest scenario. Now they have the 2 Power 4 conference, or they have. So ESPN has the deal with the SEC. They have a deal with the AACC, which they might be getting out of here soon. And then I believe they have the deal with Big 12 is at ESPN, right?
Yes, ESPN does. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they're just and then Big 10 has some splits. I don't think it's primarily ESPN. But
NBC.
Yeah, NBC.
Anyway, sorry.
Go
ahead. The big boys, yeah.
Yeah, ESPN gets what they want. They have the best Power 4 conference. They have kind of what they consider to be the best of the rest after the Big 10 and the Big 12. And now you have the best of the rest in the group of 5. And now you can throw those guys on ESPN Plus. You've got your late night slots with the with the West Coast viewership. I mean, that would be a great move for ESPN. And then you add in partners like Amazon that's been wanting to get into the game. You Turner was mentioned as a potential. Apple, yeah.
Apple does, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not advocating for these. I would hate to see these teams put onto a pay-per-view streaming service like that where nobody's going to watch the games unless they're actual fans of the teams. I think it'd be a terrible move. But when you're talking about potential money, it's out there. And so are you going to match, $20+ million that the Pac-12 Power 4? No. But can you make it financially viable and a good move for these conferences, especially if you bring in teams to the ACC? AAC, I definitely think you can.
Yeah, it's going to be whoever's leading the Pac-12 now. I'm glad it's not Klyavkov, who was responsible for the dissolution of one of the greatest sports conferences in the history of humanity. So annoying the Pac-12's gone. I hate it, but I mean, I guess it's gone. But the old Pac-12's gone. But all right, I wanted to just a couple quick rapid fire questions for you as we kind of end this out. I think this has been a good discussion. I'll just say my prediction. I do think that Air Force will leave for the AAC, will want to join the other schools. I think that Gloria Nevarez and the leadership of the Pac-12 will come together and negotiate different levels of buyouts. And you're going to see a Mountain West and Conference USA merger is probably what I think ends up happening. And so you're going to see Utah State, Wyoming, New Mexico, those schools merge with Conference USA. And the payout will be not as much so long as the Pac-12 stops at UNLV. So I do think UNLV will end up in the Pac-12. I think it'll happen before the end of this calendar year. I think that it will be announced before then. I think they're going to want to because they want to know which markets they're pitching for their media rights deal. They do not want to have to sit and wait. They don't want to be pitching their media rights deal 6 months before the season starts. That doesn't work like that. So I think this is going to be settled before the end of the year. And I do think UNLV will end up in the Pac-12. I have absolutely zero, nilch, nada interest in the AAC. I would rather. And if we don't end up in the Pac-12, my podcast, which I started to get a basketball coach fired, will turn into a fiery monologue daily until Eric Harper, our athletic director, is no longer employed. So quick rapid fire questions. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add to that, but I wanted to ask you about the football of the Mountain West Conference just briefly at the end here. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think that I don't think that they'll end up staying in the Mountain West. I have my own thoughts on Mountain West potential survivability, which we're not going to get too long. But I think there's a good possibility I think there's a really good possibility that the Pac-12 adds 3 teams, that UNLV is one of those in a negotiated settlement. If not, American Athletic Conference, I don't think that they'll stay in the Mountain West. But yeah, I'm ready for whatever rep.
Oh, but one more question. Do you want 9 or 10 teams? Because do you want to have that conference championship game, or do you think that getting to 10 teams dilutes the conference pot, the slice of the pie too much? Because getting a conference championship game is free money for the conference. So I think you have to have 10 in order to have a conference championship game.
Nope. No, and I had to look at I did another podcast. We're talking about realignment. I got asked this question. I was like, I don't know. I think they can do it without, but I did the research afterwards. Not required to have 10 teams anymore. That was part of the Big 12's decision to not increase up to 12 members if they stay at 10. So no, I can send you the article afterwards if you're interested. I believe it was published in 2016. But it is no longer required to have 10 teams as long as every team plays each other within a round robin during the season. So kind of what the Big 12 has been doing, or they play within divisions, which obviously what the Mountain West does. You can have a conference championship game, though you're not required to. So they could be 8 teams.
There you go.
As long as everybody plays each other.
You'd prefer 9 teams because then you wouldn't have to do 5 non-conference games, though, right? Wouldn't 9 teams kind of be the optimal number? That's what I had understood, that 9 teams would be where you'd want to stop right now because you don't want, especially if you don't have to have 10 for a conference championship game. I didn't know that. So I would assume 9 teams is probably the goal. Memphis, Tulane, and if it's not UNLV, it's probably going to be, I don't know. Do you really want UTSA or North Texas? I don't think those. I'd stop at 8. I wouldn't go for crappy Texas schools. I'd just go Memphis and Tulane and just live with 8 for now. No way. All right, Mountain West football. Quickly, we're going to do this in under 10 minutes. Who do you believe is the favorite? Do you think that Boise State has a good enough defense to have a good enough record to get the college football playoff spot? Because we all believe in Ashton Genty. He might be the best player in the country. I would have said Quinn Ewers before, but he got hurt now, so Genty has a leg up on him that he's not. Hopefully, please, I love watching Ashton play, so please stay healthy this year because last year was a tragedy. His numbers could have been unbelievable last year. But do you think that Boise State's defense is good enough to lead them to a college football playoff? Because their offense obviously has the requisite talent.
I don't think that Boise State's defense is the best in the Mountain West. I don't think that it's the best in the Group of 5. I don't think that it's an elite level defense by any stretch of the imagination. But are they good enough with what we have on offense? If we can fix our special teams issues, I definitely do. Boise State's defense, they are very good at getting to the quarterback. They showed last week that they can make the changes they need to have success. Last week versus Oregon, they looked terrible versus Georgia Southern. Last week versus Oregon, they held them to 23 points. We allowed 2 kick return and a punt return, but we held Oregon with Dylan Gabriel and what he did at Oregon State. The immediately following week, we held them to under 23 points. And so, yes, I think that our secondary will get better as the season goes throughout. We have every single secondary player is starting in a new position than where they started or had primary reps in last year, besides Alexander Tubner. So every single secondary player is gelling and figuring it out. If there's one position on the defense that you have got to have chemistry in, it's the secondary. Defensive line, big enough, fast enough, you can get through, you're fine. Linebacker is a little bit of that case too, but secondary has got to be able to trust each other and know where your spot is. Otherwise, you're going to have jailbreaks. And so, yes, I think Boise State secondary will get much better on the second half of the season. And I think right now our coaches have the coaching chops to adjust for their weaknesses. And defensively, especially when you look at what we have left on the schedule, I think Boise State's going to be the rep to the Group of 5 playoff.
Okay. Do you think Maddox? Obviously, I assume that you assume this, but do you think Maddox Madsen is good enough to lead the Boise State offense? Because I have seen mixed things with him. I feel like he could hurt you. Obviously, Genty is, but do you think Maddox Madsen's good enough? Why can't Dirk Cutter say what Maddox needs to improve?
That was a funny tweet.
You can tell I actually follow Boise State athletics because I was like, what the heck, Dirk? What are you doing, dude? He just plays golf, man. He just doesn't want to answer questions.
That was funny. Sean is a great guy. He took over from Ron Counts for the Idaho Statesman. I had him on the channel recently, kind of introduce himself. Sean, that was funny. I don't know if it was the accent with Sean because he's British. For anybody who doesn't know, I don't know if it was the accent that threw off or what. But that was funny just seeing him. Couldn't think of. I think that honestly, what he was doing is he was trying not to reveal a weakness that the other team capitalized on. I think that was potentially a possibility. But aside from that funny tweet and discussing that, yes, I think that Maddox Madsen is good enough to lead this Boise State offense because honestly, at the end of the day, I think that any quarterback could lead this Boise State offense to a playoff because it doesn't matter how good the quarterback is because this is a running offense. It's Ashton Genty, it's Sire Gaines, it's Dudley when he's able to come back from his injuries. This is a Boise State offense that runs through the running game, quite literally, and just needs the quarterback to do enough, not make mistakes, hand the ball off, and occasionally be able to convert a third down. And versus Georgia Southern, he was able to do that. First half versus Oregon, he was able to do that. I think in the second half versus Oregon, he could have done that if Dirk Cutter hadn't put Boise State into 5 wide formations where Oregon didn't have to account for Genty anymore and was just backing up into coverage, and then you weren't able to complete against a very good Oregon secondary in the second half. But first half numbers for Max Madsen were good. I think that Maddox Madsen has a really good awareness. They talk about his brain level playing the ball, playing the game, and what he brings to the table from an awareness perspective is elite, is what they say. And so I think he makes really good decisions, makes very quick, fast throws for the most part. He's only been sacked one time. Yeah, part of that's because we have a really, really good offensive line. Part of that is because he's good about putting the ball where it needs to be. He does make mistakes sometimes, and his height does get to him sometimes. But I think that, yes, he's good enough to lead this team through. Does that mean that Malachi Nelson won't get a chance at some point in the season? I don't know. Maddox Madsen will have to falter. But I do think that Maddox Madsen is good enough to take Boise State to the CFP.
Okay. Who's the bigger threat to Boise State, Fresno or UNLV?
I'm going to say Fresno State because when I watch that, yes, UNLV 3-0, it's great. They have a good quarterback, but he's got really good legs. But watching Kansas, they don't have a good passing game. And Boise State, yeah, they've been vulnerable to running quarterbacks in the past. They seem to be better this year. I mean, again, Georgia Southern, not that good, but Dylan Gabriel is a threat with his legs. He had over 60 yards rushing and a touchdown, long touchdown versus Oregon State. And he beat us on his legs when we played him in 2021 when he was still at UCF. They seem to be better at stopping the run game, and he didn't really have any runs at all besides one broken sack. For when he was playing for Oregon. So I think we can stop the running game. I think that our secondary is our weak point, but I don't think UNLV has the offense to beat that. I'm more worried about Kenny and his potential versus Boise State's secondary, what he did with Fresno State last year. And so I would say I think that UNLV's got a pretty tough record leading up to the Boise State game as well, which is going to make them a little bit more beat up coming in. So I'd say Fresno State is more worrisome to me than UNLV right now.
Yeah, we got absolutely hosed with the record with our schedule this year. It's absolutely brutal. We go Fresno, and then we play Syracuse, who will likely be ranked when we play them, and then we're at Utah State, at Oregon State, and then Boise State at home. We don't get to play New Mexico. We don't get to play Air Force. That's kind of a tough draw in terms of trying to stack up wins. I had UNLV at 8-4 before the year, splitting the Fresno and Boise State games that we play. And that was my prediction before the year, and I think I'm on track for that. I had us losing to Kansas, but So anyway, that's basically all I wanted to ask you, man. Thanks. This was way longer than I thought it was going to be. I'd said 45 minutes was the goal, but we went an hour and a half. So thank you so much for coming on, man. I really appreciate it. Big fan of yours. I'll keep listening to you, and I know we'll be talking throughout the course of the season. But before we go, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I really appreciate the discussion. I watched several of your videos before coming on here, and that was the first time that I had seen them is when you reached out. But man, I love your stuff, dude. You do a great job. I love your approach. It's very analytical. I love that you go so deep into the facts digging, especially even in just this conversation. And so, yeah, really, really great stuff. I really enjoyed our conversation. I like the back and forth. I like the pushback. I definitely learned some things about UNLV that I didn't know before. Not enough to say that UNLV should be in the Big 12 for me, but more things about UNLV I did beforehand. And so I appreciate it. I'm going to keep an eye on your stuff going forward. And I don't know, it's the Substack thing, right? Not YouTube. So I'm not sure how like and subscribe works with you, but whatever you need to do, guys, on this guy.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And UNLV fans, this is the best place. This and Broncos News Nation. We've been talking for a while. Sorry. I would recommend these two avenues for Boise State stuff. But yeah, so thank you, Rebel fans, for listening to this. If you're still listening, God bless you. God bless the Rebels, and let's run.